My name is Virginia Kane. I was born in San Antonio, Texas, October 24th, 1925. On June the 6th, 1953, of what my husband represented the United States at the ceremony in Normandy. It came to pass, so to speak. My husband was the assistant air attaché in the diplomatic corps, representing, of course, the United States in our embassy in Paris. We had just arrived in Paris in '53, and Eisenhower and de Gaulle were fighting. There was some sort of something between them that Eisenhower said that he did not want anybody of real importance to go to the D-Day ceremony in Normandy in June. It could be one of the lowest of the low of the diplomats. Our attaché, General Gregory, or Colonel Gregory then, said, "Who wants to go?" There were two assistant air attachés, three of them. And nobody wanted to go, but my husband said, "Well, I'm assistant air attaché. I will go. I will love to go." So he was the lowest of the low, and we went, and it was a ceremony and a time of that part of our lives that I'll never, never forget. The people of Normandy were so wonderful. They had banquets set up, wine and all their wonderful French food, plus, of course, speeches. And the speech that Duke was to give was on the beach of Normandy. And it was just like the day, it was just 10 years, really, to almost the day, that the invasion took place, and the rain came down. The clouds were, and the thunder, the lightning, it was just eerie. And we all were under wraps and papers trying to keep the rain and umbrellas from whipping, because it was just coming off the ocean. 5 of his classmates, my husband was a West Pointer, he graduated in June of '43, were killed just about on that beach. And it was haunting, because as he named the names of those classmates that were killed on that very beach, even to that day, there were out in the ocean, you could see part of the ships, and they were rotting still. The wind would carry the names of those wonderful men that died then right through the whole beach. The wind just carried it down through the beach. It was just eerie. My husband, of course, could not talk because it was such a very top secret. In the '60s, when we were confronted, of course, with Cuba and the missiles and Kennedy, the Pentagon, and my husband was in the R&D, Research and Development, in the Pentagon with General Bernard Schriever, who was a 4-star general. There were, I think, 6 or 7 people that really planned when the missiles were going to go up and how many satellites were going to be around the world at that time. All that was partly in the Pentagon, but they had the 6 or 7 people they called the Schoolhouse Gang. You'll not hear that in any of the literature about GPS. It was a little schoolhouse that they rented, these 6 or 7 people, I'll name some of them, outside the gates of Vandenberg, because Vandenberg Air Force Base is where the missiles were put up. I mean, the missiles came up, and then the satellites, of course, were being put around the world in certain places. The Schoolhouse Gang consisted of my husband, Colonel Wetzel, General Schriever, and Von Braun, who was Hitler's missiles. My husband, unfortunately, did not like him at all, but because he had the knowledge of how to put these missiles up. When it was the public let out to the public domain, it was, as I remember, in Colorado, Colorado Springs, at the Air Force Base that's there. And my husband, it was a big banquet, and of course General Electric was there, Westinghouse, all the big companies. And when my husband said, "You're going to see something that's going to change your life and our lives," they all kind of said, "Well, let's see what it is." And when it was then shown on the screen, they all left the tables, I remember, ran for the phones to call their bosses to say, "Oh my God, we had no idea." Of course, my husband in his speech said, because he was a Boy Scout when he was growing up, "Now there is no reason why any Boy Scout should be lost in a forest, because you can get him within 1 inch. Now look what we have." That it's just unbelievable. We couldn't live without GPS. It's everywhere in our lives. Would you believe, in my own living room right here in San Antonio, I was born and raised here, and he had graduated in 1943, and they came down, 5 or 6 of the West Pointers at that time. It was the Army Air Corps then. And they came to Randolph for their basic training. And I happened to know one of the cadets that, through one of my girlfriends, whose father was then the commander of Camp Normal, which is now Kelly Field. That's back in the 30s. Anyhow, it was 1943, and he called me up, and it was Tom Harrison, and he said, "I have 5 or 6 buddies. We don't know what to do. It's Saturday night. Do you think I could come over and say hi? Do you remember me?" I had only met him once at a USO affair that I was performing at that time. And I said, "Sure, I'm fine." Well, I didn't realize when I opened the door, there was nothing but a sea of hats. You know, I thought the whole Air Force was at my door. After it was just amazing to me, but I didn't know what to do with 6 wonderful, well-behaved West Pointers at my door on a Saturday night. My goodness, I thought I had died and gone to heaven. Oh, my heavens, I was so happy. And yet I said, what do I do with 6 of them there? So I was, being a pianist, I was going to play my senior recital at Arleta Lake College. And I decided that I would sit and play the Bach Partita. I'd do the Chopin B-flat scherzo, which I played, and the whole recital, which lasted about 45 minutes. And I thought, they're going to be bored to death, but they were very nice. They were not bored. The next day, this voice over the phone said, "I don't know if you remember me out of the 6 that came to the house, but I sat next to the fireplace." And I said, "Of course I remember you. You were the quietest one." And he said, "Would you like to go out?" And I said, "Oh yes, all right." He said, "Well, you pick it. I don't know where to go really." And I said, "Well, of course, I'd like to go to the horticulture room. It was the most expensive, and of course the most elite, nice supper club at that time at the St. Anthony Hotel." And that's where we had our first date. And from there on, he went off to war. He went to the South Pacific. He was in the South Pacific as a fighter pilot. We did not get married before when the war was on. My husband said he had buried too many of his classmates with the wife there, and he did not want to make me a widow, a young widow. And he didn't know, being a fighter pilot going to South Pacific, it was a very iffy situation. So he said, if I come back, and I intend to come back, we'll see what happens. And when he came back, he said, "I'm back." And I said, "Okay." He says, "Are we still on?" I said, "Yes." And so we married October 3rd, 1946, right after the war. And St. Mary's Chapel, then it was, now it's Our Lady of Grace Chapel. I'm Catholic, so, and he was Catholic too, Irish. Francis Xavier Kane, of course, with a name like that, he was Irish Catholic. We went right to Washington. My husband, eventually, we were there for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, really 5 years in Washington, and then we went to Paris for the air attaché. That's when he was assistant air attaché then. And my husband always wanted, he was very curious about everything, and he read a lot. He got his master's and his PhD from Georgetown University in geopolitics. He taught at Catholic University over the years, and he taught at Pepperdine University in Los Angeles, still while he was on duty in Los Angeles at night. So he was very well educated and always very curious. We'd go to restaurants and he'd say, "Where are you from?" to the waiter. "You have such a lovely accent." And I said, "Please don't ask that." But he was curious to see about people, about things. And I think his curiosity and his intellect made him the target of several people in the Pentagon at the time for R&D, research and development. And the imagination, that's what he said. Have imagination and go for it. It may think, "Oh, it'll never happen. Oh, it can't happen." And it almost didn't happen. Congress did not give the money to them. They gave it to the Navy, the millions. But the next year, General Schriever, being a four-star general, went to the Congress and said, "We need this money, and we need it now for security." My husband, after he retired, and he worked for Boeing as a director of space for Boeing after he retired in Los Angeles. And then in 1980, let's see, 86, 87, we came here to San Antonio because my parents were still here. And they were up in age, and I thought, well, now that I have we have a choice of where we can live, I would like to come back to my hometown. Oh, my husband never retired. As I said, his curiosity and his imagination was with him till the day he died. He always had some of either the Texas A&M students or students that were interested in science, that from Texas State or any of the colleges and universities around San Antonio. They would come here to the house, and he would explain and go into his study, and it was just, I'd give them Coke and a couple of soft drinks, and they would be there for hours sometime. He would just tell them, go and do the thing that you're supposed to do. Get your education, and then go for your imagination. Whatever you're going to do, do it. At the very end of his life, 4 years before he passed on, General Weber, who was the general of Kelly Field, called him and said, I would like to come and see you. And of course Duke said, because he was also in space and he knew all about the missiles and the GPS, he came to the house and he almost knelt. I never had a two-star general say, please accept the apology of the Air Force. He said, you fell through the cracks. You knew what you did, but we didn't. It had fallen through, and it was the, pardon me, the historian in the Pentagon who came upon Duke's papers, and he called General Weber and said, oh my goodness, he's the man that should be in the Hall of Fame. So they went through the chain of command, of course. To be in the Hall of Fame, you took 3 months. They checked it all out, and he had his Hall of Fame, and a lovely ceremony at Lackland Air Force Base. In the meantime, of course, I being still having, I think the two of us, we were married 66 years. He had his science and his thing that he did, and I had my part of music and teaching, and I started teaching when I was 21, and I am now 92, and I've been still teaching. So it's been 58 years that I've taught children, the community. I started the Crown Ridge Music Academy here, and for 5 years we had many students that went through that academy, and to this day the Crown Ridge Music Club, there are 600 children that go to adjudication every year, and that's quite a legacy for a couple of the teachers. Mary Davis and I started all of this music club for children. When I was 12 years old, I won a lovely prize with Tuesday Musical Junior Club, and the prize was a book that I have yet of Schumann's music, and it was signed by the founder of the Tuesday Musical, Mrs. Hertzberg. And Mrs. Hertzberg and Steinfeld, John M. Steinfeld, were very good friends at the turn of the century. 1915, because our club, Tuesday Musical, is 110 years old now, if I'm not mistaken. It's the oldest ladies' musical in America. It is right here in San Antonio. Mrs. Hertzberg had a few ladies that came to her house on Tuesday and would play her piano. And of course, Steinfeld started the College of Music. And I went to Steinfeld too. He was one of my teachers, my second teacher of piano. And I was with him for 6 years. All right, this pertains to very old San Antonio, and this is a story that happened to my father, who was a dentist. He was a dental surgeon. He came here to San Antonio in the early 1900s. My mother was a nurse, and my father had a dental chair, a wooden chair, which is in the dental library now. And he had a little car. Well, it was Model T Fords, and his territory was Bernie. It would take quite a little time to get from San Antonio to Bernie in those days. He was driving in this, I think it was a dirt road, partly a dirt road, and horses came upon and surrounded my father's car. And the bandits said, they all had, of course, handkerchiefs over their face, and they said, "We want your money." And my father said, "Well, you can have it, but I'll have to turn around. I'm a dentist, and I'm coming here, you know, for the community. The people need me. But if I have no money, I have to turn around to San Antonio." And he said, "Oh, you're a dentist. Oh, please forgive us. Oh," he says, "I have a horrible toothache. Oh," he says, "oh, I'm so sorry." And they turned around. He says, "I'll see you tomorrow." So there was a long line in front of my father's office. He never did know the man who wanted to rob him. I think the greatest accomplishment was when I started the Crown Ridge Music Academy, because we had, hundreds of people that came through, children. We had violinists, we had guitarists, we had all the, pretty much the instruments, teachers there. And to me, being in the community where so many people wanted music, we were in the right spot at the right time. I think commitment to the ideas that you want to pursue, and to have the, as my husband always said, have imagination. Now, he wanted to go to Mars. He kept talking to Mars. He said, "I wish I was just a little bit younger, because we are going someday to Mars." And of course, now that seems to be maybe pretty much feasible. There, at least there's talk about it. We just need a commitment and money, of course, and the adventure spirit of seeing what we can do in life. And I think that's part of it. Pick your field, be happy with it, and do what you can. Growing up, I was born right at Santa Rosa Hospital there on Houston Street. It was a small town, as I remember growing up, a very small town. I have books and books of pictures that I was in the paper, or my family. Because it was such a small town, they would take pictures when I would come in and have a watermelon. There's a big picture of my family having a watermelon party, and it was the biggest thing in the society at that time. And you look at today, my goodness, everybody has watermelon parties or little parties, but it was a big thing. The other part of San Antonio, I would say that Our Lady of the Lake, I got a degree from Our Lady of the Lake, but I went to Juilliard for my summer courses, and my teacher there was Sasha Goroniski. And I have pictures of our class in Juilliard, the summer class. And that was, to me, one of the most wonderful times of my musical career, because Sasha was a tremendous teacher. He was just fabulous. What he did so well was Chopin, and he did many, of course, Carnegie Hall recitals at that time. It was in 1945, 46. At Adelphi College, I went 1 year to Adelphi because Mother did not want me to be in New York by myself. Adelphi College was out in Garden City, and at that time, I had a memory. I played for the assembly of all the people in the college, a Beethoven, a Rondo in C, and afterwards a tall man with glasses was in the wings, I didn't know him, but he was going to play. And he said, would you mind doing a favor for me? And I said, of course. He says, my name is Aaron Copeland. And I said, oh, hello. I didn't know him at that time. And he said, would you please come back to the stage and turn my pages for me? And I said, of course, I'd be glad to do that. He said, well, it's in manuscript form, so, but I think if you get lost, I'll nod my head 2 measures before and you will turn it. And I said, okay, fine, no, I'm sure. To this day, that was Aaron Copeland. And he's one of the biggest, of course, composers that America has ever had, besides, of course, Bernstein. Of patience, a lot of patience, and also a sense of humor. Because they have the humor, and sometimes they look at you and look at you. And one time I had some spinach on my teeth, and they kept looking at me, and I thought, what are they looking at? And finally one little boy said, there's something on your teeth. I said, oh, that's a piece of spinach. But they're very open, and most of all my students were always very polite to me. Because when they came, I said right away, you call me Mrs. Kane, and you thank me for your lesson after your lesson. No matter what happens in between, always thank me, because I, am there for you, and you'll learn. You will be happy learning. I had many students of the stars in Los Angeles when I taught there. Lauren Green and Gillian came for 3 years. Lauren Green would sit in my living room, and he said, I learned so much by just sitting there and listening to you talk to Gillian about Beethoven, about Chopin, about Mozart. He said, I knew nothing about that. And there was also, I taught at that time a singer that had many platinum, Jody James. She had many platinum records. And I taught her 2 children. So I was involved with also Christian, Marlon Brando's Christian.